My name is Bradley Hicks, and I am the pastor at Whiteland Missionary Baptist Church, and I'm wanting to share with you my call into the ministry, or my call to preach. First of all, I want to say that I know the way that our world and the way that our society has perverted the ministry is that they've made it to where a man chooses to go and to start preaching, and he goes to school, and he does all these things. And I'm not here to condemn going to school, but I am here to tell you that it takes more than going to school to be a minister. You have to be called by the Lord to preach. Paul told us in 1 Timothy, the first chapter, that God counted him faithful, putting him into the ministry. And I know for a fact that God has to put you into the ministry. And so I want to tell you about when God did that to me. I was 17 years old. I had a group of young men, friends who were young men, and we would travel to different places throughout the summer and go to youth weekends, go to different services for revival in the Indianapolis area. And some of them were preachers and some of them weren't. And one weekend in August, we went out to Calvary Missionary Baptist Church to a youth weekend out there, and there was a lot of good fellowship. There were wonderful services and messages, and we all bonded a lot. And on the drive home, there were my brother-in-law and then one of our church members here were with me, and we were driving home, and we got back real late one Sunday evening, and we stopped in a park in Plainfield at probably 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, and we just stopped at this park and went into this little gazebo and just prayed for a few minutes that God would help us as we went back to school and as we kind of went back to the busyness of life after the summer was over. And after that, I was the one driving the car, and then I took my brother-in-law, who wasn't my brother-in-law at the time, but I took him, I dropped him off at his house in Plainfield, and then I drove our church member, Brother Corey, I drove him back to his house, at his dad's house, and I remember very vividly that he had already taken one of his suitcases inside, and then he came back out, and he got in the passenger seat of my car, he grabbed what was his, he shut the door, and the minute he shut the door and he was walking right in front of my car, I just felt this heavy burden to preach the gospel. And I can't really describe it other than to saying that it was just a desire to tell people about the Lord and what he had done. And I knew at the moment that he called me, I knew what it was. And my dad was a minister, and he had had some really hard times to where he was no longer active in the ministry. And as a kid, I kind of attributed his problems to the ministry, that the reason why he had all these problems was because of the ministry. And so as I'm 17 years old and I'm driving back at 1 in the morning, and I was just crying because I thought the same things that he struggled with are the same things I'm going to struggle with. And he just went through so many hardships, and I was just anticipating, I guess, that I'd have to go through the same ones. And so I went home, and I was crying the whole way home. I tried to clean myself up when I went inside. And my mom, I didn't really stop and talk to her like I normally did or let her know that I was home. And I went in there and I tossed and turned all night, and the next morning I had to be at work. And I always prided myself at work of being on time and being well put together and a hard worker. And I drove, it was about a 25-minute drive, and I left my mom's house, and I was driving, and I was crying because I was just afraid of the future and being called to preach and the responsibilities. And as I was driving, I got a phone call from a brother Phil Mayle. And I opened my phone, and I cleared my voice, and I said, "Hello." And he said, "Brother, you need to tell me something," was the first thing that he said. And of course, I just began to weep even harder, and I wouldn't say and admit to myself or admit to him that I had been called to preach, but it was certainly an eye-opener to me that God knew what to do to prompt me to tell and not hide it. And I got to work, and I was just a mess. I was crying at work, and everybody was a little concerned because I was never like that. And so my manager sent me home, and I remember that my dad lived about 10 minutes from there, and he was the closest person to me that was a minister. And so I got in my car, and I drove to his apartment kind of early in the morning, and I never, in all the years that my dad's been in the area and I've been old enough to drive, I've never just driven and shown up to his house unexpectedly. I always give him a warning. And I was crying so much on the way that I just couldn't call him, and so I knocked on his door, and he woke up and answered the door, and I went into his house, and I was very sober and quiet, and he was talking away about a couple different things, and then he just said, "Brad, why'd you stop by?" And I just started just bawling and just saying, "I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it." And I wouldn't say what it was because I felt like if I said it, then it was true. And we talked a little bit, and he said something that helped me, and I've never forgotten since, and it helped me tremendously. He said, "Brad, if you leave here and you don't tell any person what you told me today, I'll never mention it to anybody. I'll keep it to myself, and because that's between you and the Lord." But he said, "I just want to encourage you and tell you this, that God has designed for you the best, most enjoyable, not that the ministry is always enjoyable, but just the best life that you could ever experience. He's got it all planned out for you. And all you need to do to experience the greatest joy and experience, fulfilling your purpose, which is the greatest joy in life, is to just follow him. And the moment that you begin to think something would be better than what he has planned for you is when you begin to fall short of experience the best life God has planned for you. And right when he said that, I just knew that I couldn't fight it. God had called me into the ministry, and if hardships came, difficulties came, that was part of God's plan, and I couldn't do better than what God had planned. And I guess I accepted it that day, and I surrendered my life to the Lord to use my life however he's wanted to. And ever since then, I've always tried to let the Lord know that if anywhere he wanted me to go and anything he wanted me to do, that my life was his. Because I surrendered it to him on that day. I surrendered it to him when I got saved, but sometimes we have a tendency to take a lot of things back. And that day I surrendered it to him, and I just want to encourage you, if you've been called into the ministry and you've been called to preach, it's scary, and it's a heavy weight, and it's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do. But it's also, there's something about doing what God has created you to do that surpasses anything else this world can offer. And there's been a few times where God has just helped me to tell the truth to people that needed it. And there's nothing like speaking the truth with God's Spirit helping you straight from his word, and just knowing that God designed you for that. And I'm so thankful that God called me to preach. I am so thankful that he's entrusted me with that he's entrusted me to pastor this little church in Whiteland. And I just want to encourage anyone who don't go, if you can avoid it, do it, because you probably haven't been called. But if he's given you that call, I want to encourage you to follow that. So I hope this is a help to somebody.